Well, welcome everybody. You are back here for the Breakthrough News Free Speech TV special DNC coverage. This is day two, night two, however you want to look at it. And of course, tonight is the final night of the Democratic National Convention, and it certainly is a big night for Vice President Kamala Harris, who will be, of course, the keynote speaker there tonight. The DNC has teased some sort of speaker right before her to tee up. A lot of people saying after Oprah last night it's going to be Beyonce. There's no confirmation of that whatsoever, but it's certainly floating around. So the Democrats, it seems, are going to put on quite a show this evening. And in many ways, they're going to need to put on quite a show to distract people from the brewing controversy that's been happening since last night. The Democratic National Convention has denied any Palestinian American speaker, but specifically a speaker representing the uncommitted movement of delegates who are part of a broader group of about 700,000, I believe, Democratic voters who voted uncommitted as a protest vote over the Democrats' complicity in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And of course, this will also be a very big night for Vice President Harris because she will be making a broader case to the people of the United States about why she is the best person to address many of the extraordinarily serious issues that people are facing. And as we started the show last night, I mean, we noted that this is a very difficult, very tough time. Of course, inflation is one of the biggest issues for people and one of the biggest conversations because we're in a cost of living crisis. And as I've stated before yesterday, but to repeat for those who weren't on the show, we're in a situation where you have 147 million odd people here in the United States, about 57.3% of the population that are having at least a little difficulty meeting their expenses week to week. So that's essentially nearly 60% of the population that week to week is having to do something to try to find a way to make it week to week, whether it's borrowing from a friend, going without, and going without is another one. You've got about 25 million people 25 million people who in the last 7 days here in the United States of America, the richest country in the history of countries, said that they often or sometimes did not have enough to eat. So sometime, if not many of the days in the last week, you had 25 million people going hungry. And no surprise, the price of food is up 2.2% year on year this month as it concerns food in the grocery store, 4.1% if you're talking about food away from home. So that means that going out and doing anything with your friends or family, much more difficult. Electricity is up 4.9%, basically 5%. The cost of housing up 5% from this month in 2023. So a lot of major challenges facing people who will be watching Vice President Harris tonight as it concerns the cost of living crisis, which she has made the centerpiece of her run, saying that she will be able to address this, that she'll build 3 million new homes. Now, the lowest number of affordable homes needed is 4.3 million, so already not really meeting the need, but you've got 4.2 million people in the next 2 months who say they may be kicked out of their home due to foreclosure or eviction. So there are a range of different challenges that people are going to want to hear from. And I think that there will be a lot of, critique going up to it, coming out of it about whether or not they will be changes that'll actually meet the scale of the problem. But that certainly will be something for us to continue to cover here as we move forward. But that is absolutely the agenda and the way the agenda is set. And, in addition to Gaza, one thing that we've also noticed across really the entire convention, really since Vice President Harris has ascended to her position as the Democratic nominee, is the Democrats have been moving in many different ways more towards the right. Some might say the center, but I certainly would say the right in terms of their positioning. We've obviously seen a continuation of the support for the genocide in Gaza. We've seen, as I've said, solutions to many problems that seem to be wanting in many ways. Vice President Harris saying she'll address grocery prices, but not really saying exactly how, but most notably sort of many of her aides sort of saying it's similar to a bill that Elizabeth Warren is putting forward, which just gives the government the right to investigate and maybe sue. So you can see certainly questions about whether or not they're going to be able to do that. But on a range of fronts that you don't even hear much about, there are changes being made inside of the Democratic platform and from the speakers on the stage. And one I just wanted to mention at the outset of the show, this is the first time in over a decade that the Democratic Party platform has not included opposition to the death penalty. They've stripped it out. They didn't add in anything pro-death penalty, but obviously by stripping it out, you are making a clear statement if it's been in there for a decade, essentially, until it was there. And obviously many Democrats are against the death penalty. Vice President Harris herself, when she was the district attorney of San Francisco, made a big point in both her race and in her tenure in office, saying that she would not implement the death penalty. Now, of course, when she became Attorney General of California, she reversed that position and did, in fact, fight to keep prisoners on death row, even prisoners who had significant evidence surrounding their case of actual innocence. But I think it speaks to a lot of the dynamics that are concerning many people on the progressive side of the ledger here when you look at this, because we are talking about something, the death penalty, that is at the lowest amount of popularity it ever has been. I mean, the majority of states at this point, 29 states have either abolished the death penalty or just stopped executions. The governor has put a moratorium on them for many reasons, principally that it is not that popular. For the first time in the history of Gallup polling this issue, more Americans, 50%, believe that the death penalty is administered unfairly as opposed to fairly. Gallup also asked people if they thought the death penalty was imposed too often, about the right amount, or not enough, and 56% said it was imposed too often or about the right amount. It used to be pretty much not enough and about the right amount. So you can see this is an issue where you're not really going to lose any votes in a platform that no one even really looks at the party platforms anyway. The candidates just do whatever they want. So it's really kind of a messaging exercise. So it shows that obviously, these are the types of changes you make purely because you want to appeal to, hard right, pro-execution, you basically racist bigots, other people who seem to have this sort of view of the death penalty as a part of their quote-unquote law and order agenda, which is always extremely racialized in the way that it's portrayed in America. And while I'm at it, I'll just note, not really an election issue, but the communications management units, which are called little Guantanamos, and there's 2 of them in federal maximum security, have been expanding quite a bit, 140%, in fact, between 2007 and 2022. So extremely brutal. Solitary confinement, continuing also on the rise in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which of course will be under the purview of Vice President Harris, who, as we know, has been the Attorney General of California and the District Attorney of San Francisco. So yet again, we can see here many of the issues that are facing her. We'll see if she tries to address them later tonight. Of course, she will be probably an hour or so after we go off the air. We will be here from 7 to 9. Again, this is a special broadcast of Breakthrough News and Free Speech TV. We've got a lot lined up for you here today on the show. Obviously, we've got a great panel like we had last night, and thanks to our panelists from last night for being with us. We have live on-the-ground coverage coming from Chicago. We've got our Breakthrough News team that is there on the ground and has been there since actually several days before the convention, capturing all sorts of events, protests, talking to delegates and others. So quite a bit of content we've been able to get. We'll be bringing you more from them, interviews from the ground, average everyday people in Chicago, as well as those who are tied to the broader political scene who are around it. We're going to look at a lot of different issues with some interviews we were able to get from experts on critical topics, from immigration to the politics of Black America and how that is playing out in this election that we're also going to play for you. And we are going to be joined by India Walton later in the show live to discuss it all. So we've got so much for you here on the show. We're very excited for you here on the show. A great opportunity for you to let folks know that we are here and we are live. We're on Free Speech TV. We're on the Breakthrough News YouTube. So there are a lot of ways that you can get us as we lead into this big night of Kamala Harris, who is going to be speaking here tonight. I think this is actually one of her, I don't think she's ever given a primetime speech at a DNC. I think I read that. So we'll see. We had Coach Walz last night. We'll talk a little bit about that and a little bit of the connections between them, and certainly a little bit of the connections that exist, between Uber and Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, and what that says about the corporatization, if you will, of the political system here in the United States. So welcome. Happy to have you here. Breakthrough News, Free Speech TV. Let's just get ready to get into it here. We are very, very happy to be joined for our live panel that will be appearing with us various times throughout the show here tonight by Katie Halper, who is the host of The Katie Halper Show and also co-host of Useful Idiots, and Lawrence Grandpre, who's the director of research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, which is the grassroots think tank based in Baltimore. Thank you both so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I like this perfect synergy there. That means we're off to a great start for the show. Lawrence, let me start with you here. Last night I caught a little bit of Walz, but the thing I thought was interesting in terms of the coverage of him is they're saying, he's trying to appeal to, middle America. He's talking about hunting. He's talking about being in the National Guard. He's talking about being a coach. Well, for those who maybe are just listening, I am Black, and I certainly did some hunting in my youth. I know a lot of people of every race who have served in the military, and many people of all races who are also coaches. So it's interesting to me how these were seen as markers of whiteness almost in terms of how it's looked at. And I don't know how much you want to comment on that. It's just my editorial. But I guess it just sort of seems like it says so much about the way Democrats are trying to appeal to the electorate more broadly.
Yeah, it reminds me of Clinton when they put him in those Gore-Tex suits and wanted to make him appeal to middle America. And it's interesting because they're trying to pair some of the cultural politics and some of the leftist politics with a moderate veneer, what they're claiming is leftist policy. So again, electorally, it's very concerning because especially with this push towards suburbanization of the Democratic Party, you're looking at the professional managerial class wanting someone who they feel comfortable with, but also trying to peel off enough of the white working class to cobble together an electoral coalition. And when I did my analysis of the demographics of the 2020 turnout was down in places like Philadelphia. Turnout was down in places like Milwaukee. So all this talk about energizing the anti-Trump coalition came at the cost of investing in a policy agenda that explicitly turned out the people that were supposedly doing all this policy for the most downtrodden, the most poor urban districts, their turnout was down. And so we really seeing this huge shift in the Democratic Party towards people who were, in many cases, Romney Republicans, and in many cases, Bush Republicans, in many cases, Bush 1 Republicans. So this normalization, this weirdness, I think risks coming at the cost of genuine investments in community control, especially in urban cities, and a more push towards the suburban professional managerial class, which I think it brings in a technocracy that many leftists have accepted because the only way they feel they can get investment is if the technocrats control the money, because there are all these concerns about corruption and people stealing money, corrupt lawmakers, and particularly Black urban politics. And I don't think the left has really grappled with that dynamic and how it's playing out in top-level electoral politics.
Katie, in a similar vein, I think this has been sort of a lament, obviously, of many progressive people about the convention so far. Obviously, the issues of Gaza that are out there for everyone to see, but that on sort of every front, it seems like there's almost like an abject surrender and a totally sort of obsequiousness that Harris comes in and she picks Walz, and that people, a lot of the so-called sort of progressive thought leaders are like, yep, we got it. Everything's fine. I wonder how you're seeing that as someone, who has been following this closely.
Well, I have to say, I think that Walz was a politically shrewd choice, but not a particularly progressive choice. And it has been pretty embarrassing watching people talk about all this joy. I don't know how you can talk about joy when you have an ongoing, unfolding genocide, when you have people who are starving, being starved. You have Israeli soldiers raping people. You have Israeli media actually streaming the sexual abuse that these Israeli soldiers are engaging in. And I don't know how you can have any joy when you have people like AOC running cover and doing interference for Kamala Harris and saying that she's not going to work tirelessly for a ceasefire, but that she is right now doing that. And it's such a blatant lie, and it's such an insult to everyone's intelligence. And I think that the way the Democrats have treated Palestinians and Palestinian Americans at the actual convention is a kind of microcosm of their contempt for Palestinians. The idea that they gave them this panel, right? This little classroom that they could talk in, so tokenizing, so dismissive, but of course wouldn't let a Palestinian American person actually be one of the main speakers. I'm sure that you've shown clips of this on one of your shows, Eugene, but, seeing these delegates literally hit a woman in a hijab, a protester, hit her with a sign, which is such a perfect metaphor, and then seeing what you're showing now on the screen are people leaving the convention as Palestinian pro-Palestine protesters are reciting statistics, names, numbers about those who have been killed, and people actually on camera, knowing that they're filmed, covered their ears and were actually mocking and impersonating these people. So I think that the only way you can have joy here is if you have a kind of sociopathic disconnect from what is happening to the people in Palestine.
No, and talking about that disconnect, Lawrence, to kind of bridge a couple issues here too. I mean, it's interesting because obviously, in the earlier part of this year, there were many, many articles. Charles Blow had 2 op-eds in the New York Times about how Gaza was actually hurting the Biden administration at that time, Biden campaign, with black voters, especially with young black voters. But now, since we've had this switch to Kamala, it seems like there's been sort of an aggressive effort to sort of pit the 2 issues against each other. And I think we've seen that, here at the convention, sort of like you got to just pull back on the gas here so Kamala can be the first black woman president, and so on and so forth. I don't have to say much. I know you know exactly what's going on. I just wonder what you think about how this dynamic is playing out and how organic it is, as opposed to how much it's an attempt to sort of manipulate the public opinion over the views of the black community.
Yeah, it's the level of emotion that black people feel is real. So it's a very powerful tool to co-opt it into these symbolic investments. And not to repeat too much of what my colleague Davon said last night, there is this incredible desire for representation amongst the black professional classes. And there's also this desire to just not want to think about the complications that come with some of the intra-class dynamics and some would say intra-class betrayal that's happened around Palestine. The Black liberation traditions, the Black Panthers, solidarity with Palestine, that kind of gets co-opted with black electeds. Even folks in Baltimore like Elijah Cummings, famously, he took kids to Israel. And the way that AIPAC has engaged the Black caucus, it is just this desire to not think about the black youth that were prosecuted under folks like Kamala, and even the call for ceasefire. When people say ceasefire, the bare minimum, it's like, give me a ceasefire so I don't got to think about it no more. So I can just enjoy Kamala. And I think that that's not only disrespectful to the lives that are lost, disrespectful to the black radical tradition, it's disrespectful to the actual linkages between the politics that's oppressing people in Palestine and oppressing people here in America. So it's just a brief example. I remember there was this picture of Palestinians cooling off in the ocean. That's the only place they don't have, a lot of them don't have AC, don't have power. And apparently it caused a furor in Israel. How dare they enjoy themselves? How dare they enjoy the beach? We need to make their lives miserable. And I couldn't help but think it's the same people here in Baltimore who have this sort of Zionist politics, who have this fear of black youth congregating in the harbor. So anytime there are black youth anywhere near the water, there is this, we got to keep them away. There are these black hordes of youth taking over our cities, and we have to pass this legislation controlling them. And it's not a metaphor. They're the exact same people. The former head of AIPAC lives in Baltimore County and invests heavily in Baltimore local politics to push the kind of lock black youth up policies that mirror the kind of social control we see in places like the Gaza Strip.
Well, yes, it's very well taken point, and I think a very interesting subset of connections. A couple minutes here before we go into to clip there from the ground on the DNC, but I just want to ask you quickly, Katie. You've been one of the most outspoken, I think, Jewish people here in the United States on the issue of how the issue of anti-Semitism is being heavily manipulated in this. And it feels like we're seeing sort of the same thing again here, where we had the family of the hostages on No Palestinian Speaker. Just a couple minutes. I didn't know if you wanted to just say something about how that's been striking you during the DNC week.
Yeah, I think that, you had Doug Emhoff talking about how anti-Semitism has become a crisis after October 7th. We've seen a really dangerous, I would say, weaponization of anti-Semitism that ironically is not only perpetuating anti-Semitism, but is an anti-Semitic trope in itself, right? Because people like to claim that being anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. Now, the only way that that's possible is if all Jews are a monolith who all support Israel. And the irony there is that that's the dual loyalty trope, like a famously anti-Semitic stereotype. So you have the government of Israel, AIPAC, ADL, actually leaning into this offensive trope. And of course, what Israel's doing when they pretend that they represent all Jews, that's making the world less safe for Jews. I mean, I don't feel safe. I oppose what Israel does. I speak out against what Israel does, first and foremost, because it's the right thing to do. It's a moral crisis. But also, I have to say that in terms of self-interest, it's also important for Jews, because if the world thinks that we're all co-signing this carnage and these crimes against humanity and this live stream genocide, that's not a good thing. So again, just a reminder that Zionism does not care about fighting anti-Semitism. In fact, it requires anti-Semitism to justify its own existence.
Well, we want to go to Chicago, where our team was on the ground several days ago at a forum that was addressing some of the fallout from some of, I think, what we've said with the contradictions of the Democrats, and that is the possibility that this could be a large year for a third-party vote and that many people are looking for alternatives. BT's K. Pritsker was there, and I think it was an alternative candidate forum, but nonetheless, you will see here some of what he was able to capture there in Chicago.
DNC hasn't started yet, but we're here at the Chicago People's Assembly, which is basically a counter summit to the DNC. It's a third-party convention, so third-party candidates, Dr. Jill Stein from the Green Party and Claudia De La Cruz from the Party for Socialism and Liberation are speaking here today about why they're protesting the DNC and why they're protesting the two-party duopoly in this country. And many different organizations have gathered here locally from Chicago, but also from nearby areas to say why they think that people should vote their conscience and they should vote beyond the two parties that have been offered to us. So we're going to hear from those speakers today and some of the people that have come out to support this event.
So this is the Chicago People's Assembly. We're putting on an event. Basically, the DNC is here this weekend and going forward, and they put a big barrier around the United Center. It's $75 million additional funds for police to secure the event. So we wanted to show people that there is an alternative to that you can actually come and speak to presidential candidates who represent the people and are not funding a genocide like the Democrats.
They're trying to force down our throats a political system where you go to the polls and you vote against what you hate the most instead of for what you want. Well, the system of voting against what you hate the most, it has no moral compass, it has no goal, it has no progression, it is not a political strategy. Do not think that the solution to the party talking about genocide is to vote for the party conducting genocide right now. They are not the lesser evil. Fascism is here right now. We don't have to wait for Donald Trump for fascism. There's no greater trademark of fascism than to be conducting genocide. When you are bashing in heads, when you are creating cop cities all around the country where the Israeli occupation forces are doing the training, when you are supporting that, when you are supporting the police state that we have, the censorship that we have, the war on protesters that we have, that is what fascism looks like. The Republicans may fight the results of election after the election, but the Democrats are fighting it before the election by throwing candidates like us off the ballot.
We're talking about taking back what is ours, what we have built as working class people, what we so rightfully deserve. There is no reason why one man gets to earn $7.8 million an hour while people are fighting for $15 an hour and can barely feed their people, their families. We're talking about taking the billions of dollars that are collectively produced by our collective labor and is privatized by these parasites of society and capitalism and putting that money to work for us. We're talking about taking those corporations back and making them public utilities. They will ask us, well, how do you
People's Summit there in Chicago. That took place just before the opening of the Democratic National Convention. And of course, the issue of the protest on the outside and other things will be something that we cover. But certainly this is really one of the subtexts that's happening here as it concerns the DNC, is whether or not Kamala Harris will be able to appease enough people, particularly over the ongoing genocide in Gaza, to avoid significant defections to, quote unquote, third party candidates like Jill Stein, who you saw there, like Claudia De La Cruz, who you saw there, like Cornel West, who you saw there, who, of course, are all very explicitly against the genocide and arguing more significantly that the policies of the Democrats don't really meet the scale of the problem. But before we go back to our excellent panel to sort of put some different to take the similar issue from a separate perspective, I should say, our team there on the ground in Chicago was able to interview an Uber driver there in the city of Chicago about how she's viewing all the different political choices in the context of this year's election.
So we're here with
Angela Whitfield. I don't care who knows that. I'll wear my name.
Angela. We were talking on the way over here. You're a local. You live in Chicago, yeah?
Well, I live in the west suburbs now, but I'm born and raised, lived here until 2009, and I'm very attached. My family's here, and I'm invested.
And, we were talking a little bit about the DNC. Tell us how you feel about the Democratic Party, about, what they, promise and what you feel the reality of the situation is.
It's all lies. By now we know it. I voted for Barack Obama twice. Got disappointed, but that was before I was able to see what's really happening. They're all in it together. I don't trust them. I'm sorry, because I really wanted to be able to vote. I want to do my part, but I just can't, because I don't like either of them. Kamala Harris is so ridiculous. Like, this is ridiculous. The fact that they're even putting her up on the ticket. But I know why, because they think she's going to be an easy shoe-in because she's the vice president. And it's not going to go like I challenge to say she will win. I think Trump's got this, And I happen to say I like him better than Kamala, and I don't like him, okay? So...
And, the way the Democrats are sort of selling it in a big way is like, well, she's young, she's a woman, she's black. They think she's going to reach...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
They think she's going to reach all these, young voters and stuff. How do you feel about it?
She won't. Look, I know a lot of my people, black people, are voting for Kamala Harris. And I don't judge them for that, but I think that's what's happening. They're voting based on the fact that they think she's for them. Like, even if color is notwithstanding, they believe she's for them. But most of them, I challenge to say, have not done their work on this, Miss Ma'am. How she locked up those black women. I'm sorry, because I'm a black woman. She locked up those black women and went after them treacherously, right? Because they used someone's address for their children to have a better education. Not saying that was right. But did she have to give them 15 years? And what did she do with the black guys? She locked them all up over weed. Now weed is legal and everybody's rich, but my people are still in jail. No, it's hypocrisy, and I'm just personally not standing for it.
Yeah, one thing is that you said is that, neither party really represents us. You don't like either candidate. How do you feel about the fact that it feels like in America, you really don't have a choice? You are offered two choices, but they largely don't meet our needs.
I think it's bullshit, excuse me, but what I think we do need to do is recognize that it's not for us, and sometimes it means sitting it out. You got to do the right thing, like continue to vote for them is what? Like, I'm going to vote for him because vote for her because I'm not. So for me, I won't be voting for Kamala. Trump, like I said, I was leaning towards, and I don't like him. But I like him better than her, and I was leaning towards voting for Trump until he said he's going to make sure that the police get their power back. We will not be prosecuting them, and they will have complete immunity. And what? When have they lost their power? When have they lost their power? They didn't lose their power. We're asking them to kind of scroll back. Okay, killing people unwarranted? But they get away with it most of the time. So I feel like all these people are in on it, including the government at the top,
Well, we are back here on the Breakthrough News Free Speech TV special live DNC coverage with Katie Halper and Lawrence Grandpre. Lawrence, I'll just start with you. I mean, shout out to Angela Whitfield, by the way, for joining us. I thought she had a lot of interesting points in there. I don't know if there's anything that just jumped out at you about her commentary.
Yeah. There's a lot. I'll try to be brief. I think it is many people will be surprised the idea that she'd be like, I'd rather vote for Trump, but then knew like specific stuff about Kamala's record locking up black folks. I do think there's something to, I've always felt this. There's something about someone who will lie to your face as opposed to someone who will gaslight you into thinking they are for your people, because then you're putting the integrity of your entire people on the line. Think of it like barbershop integrity. When the politician does something crazy, they're like, is that your man? Is that your woman? And then you have to defend that politician. And in an environment where people desperately feel a desire to want to have a sense of self-value, the idea of having to enter into such bad faith to vote for these folks we know are lying to us is insulting. So we'd rather not vote or vote for someone that lies to our face than vote for someone who will gaslight us consistently. So one thing we consistently say is the only thing I can tell people, if that's what they're saying, is I got to have something tangible, a tangible, concrete commitment I can hold folks to. So I got brought into a room where they were trying to Democratic Party of Maryland, how do we get people to vote for Also Brooks against Hogan? And I said, look, a lot of people can't get over Also Brooks' close relationship to AIPAC. But if you give me a birthing center, not just protecting the status quo and abortion rights, but women who don't want to go to the hospital, don't want to have a racist doctor give them an unnecessary C-section, don't want to have a horrible potential for medical malpractice, they want to have a place where their doula can help them bring a child into this world. You're pro-family, at least you say you are. Give me a birthing center. Give me a building I can point to. So when they tell me, if that's your man, if that's your woman, it's like, hey, your sister had a baby in the building they built. And I've been telling folks in the Black reproductive justice community, withhold your vote if you can't get a concrete commitment. And if Also Brooks doesn't give it to you, go to Westmore when he wants a re-election. And if he doesn't give it to you, vote for the Green Party. And we're going to have a Green Party candidate on the ballot in Maryland for governor. And I've been on that podcast. I've known that dude since I was 15 years old. Right. So we as not a nonprofit can engage in direct political advocacy where we can have these sort of nuanced conversations about voting and how to extract concessions.
No, very important issue. Katie, I saw you nodding as we came out of the interview there with Angela. Tell me what struck you.
No, I mean, I thought it was refreshing and important. And I just thought she was making really good points about how people like to hide racist policies behind the color of the person who is enforcing them. And obviously, Kamala Harris, as a Black woman, prosecuted parents for truancy, put people behind bars because they let their kids skip school. We see this a lot. And I know that you had earlier brought up the idea of technocracy. We kind of see this woke washing technocracy apparatus where people, they like to talk about shattering the glass ceiling and being slay queens, and they're literal slay queens. I mean, that's literally what they do, right? When they're as hawkish as people like Kamala Harris are. So I just thought it was inspiring to see someone who just was calling that out and calling out the weaponization of identity politics to really shield very, not just unjust and immoral policies, but implicitly racist ones.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a very important issue. If folks have the opportunity to check some of it, last night we had Tara Hauska, the water protector and organizer, and she was saying something similar about the role of the land acknowledgement opening up on the DNC, that it's just like beyond the least that you could do to act like you cared. And as she called it, sort of such a neoliberal underpinning, which, using the phrase neoliberal, one of the reasons I really wanted to show that, I thought it was a great interview, but was the fact that she was an Uber driver. And I feel that this is one element that people aren't looking at. So, of course, Tim Walz, when he was governor, I guess he's still governor, of the state of Minnesota, gutted the bill that would have, helped Uber drivers to gain a better income. He was very much in favor of this issue of them being listed as independent contractors, which basically means Uber's not responsible for benefits and wages. And interestingly enough, Kamala Harris's brother-in-law is a guy named Tony West, who is the general counsel of Uber, and who, of course, has been representing Uber in these lawsuits to make sure that Uber drivers are not counted as anything other than independent contractors, so they can't make a lot of money. And Tony West is an African-American who I guess many people would say who has made it, but I don't think that's the key factor about him, but it does maybe speak to the nature of the politics we're seeing here. But I want to talk to both of you about this. I'll start with you, Lauren. Lawrence, I mean, it just seems like it's so in your face, the sort of corporatization. Maybe it's always this way, but it just seems so in your face to have the vice president and the brother-in-law of the potential president be directly tied to promoting the interests of a company like Uber that for people like Angela is not providing real significant living wages and benefits.
Yeah, it's the flip side of the freedom agenda. It's not a positive freedom to live free of poverty and to have control in your workplace. It's a negative freedom to be free of restrictions, like having to sign up to be an employee. And it's like, oh, you can freelance, you can hop in and hop off. This is some of the rhetoric they used to defeat the initiative in California, where they wanted to change the law to have it be so, you're really an employee, but they want to make you feel like not just legally a contractor, but make you feel like being a contractor is an expression of your freedom. So this new freedom agenda, we got to be really careful what we ask for, because while it's a real, again, almost libertarian version of freedom, the freedom to get an abortion, the freedom to love who you want to love. And it's been stunning how much of that old school quasi-libertarian rhetoric has filtered into this convention and really being sold to us as culturally progressive. And this is the flip side of that, I believe.
No, I think it's a great point. And I mean, obviously, Katie, if we go out on the street and we ask people, does big money control politics? Everyone is going to say yes. It's one of these things that I think we all know. But I feel like when we get to campaign season, then people always want to say, well, just because this person and that person was donating to them doesn't necessarily mean anything. But it does feel like, the Uberization of the economy, quote unquote, is what so many people have been decrying for years, that this should be a red flag for at least, working class people about what to expect.
Well, everyone should be celebrating that West, her brother-in-law, Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, talk about the revolving door, is taking time away from Uber to support his sister-in-law in her presidential ambitions, which is a perfect metaphor. But yeah, I think that, the idea that you're supposed to think Kamala Harris is young and relatable, and the fact that she's a Black woman, that should make it more palatable that she is part of this corporate, technocratic, neoliberal establishment. I think you do see people seeing through that more and more, which is encouraging, but not enough people are seeing through it. And too many people are still being seduced by it. But we saw this. I mean, obviously people know I was very vocal about Bernie Sanders. I'm not saying this in defense of Bernie Sanders, but that campaign just laid so bare how craven and disgusting the attempt to weaponize identity politics was. I mean, we all probably remember Hillary Clinton saying, is breaking up the banks and going to end racism? No, as if anyone was saying that on the one hand, but also as if the banking crisis and the fallout from that, the housing crisis, wasn't incredibly racialized. I mean, it was a perfect example of showing her how out of touch she was with one of the ways racism functions. So it's disappointing because it's still working, but I think it's not working on young people as much as it used to work, which is encouraging. And one other thing I want to bring up is that just really, in terms of abortion, I do think abortion is an important right, but I think we'd all agree probably that if it were so important to the Democrats, they probably would have codified it by now, or they wouldn't have said it wasn't a priority, like Nancy Pelosi said and Barack Obama said. And obviously, I mean, this is something that Democrats love to fundraise off of and fearmonger off of. And I'm not saying it isn't something that should inspire fear. I do think it is, but that's why it makes it so irresponsible for the Democrats not to be fighting to codify that right.
No, important issue. And, one thing I want to pick up on quickly here, Lawrence, that our Uber driver interview mentioned was the issue of how the legalization of marijuana is playing out. I know this has been an issue in the state of Maryland. There's a lot of conversation that Kamala Harris may at some point in the next couple of months before the campaign maybe try to lay out more of a decriminalization agenda. I mean, speak to that if you can, because I think this is a concern that a lot of people have, not that they're against decriminalization, but it doesn't seem equitable in how it's happening.
Yeah, Chicago is one of the places we studied as what not to do with cannabis legalization, because they basically handed the entire cannabis industry to the white medical cannabis producers, then said they were going to reinvest the tax revenue, but then they gave it all to like the big nonprofits. So it's one of those things where it is so frustrating because people immediately go to the business side. Black people sold it on the streets. We should get to sell it to make money off of it. And the reality is, like, federal legalization of cannabis would release cannabis from California to flood every market in the states and destroy every local state cannabis market. And that's why we've been so adamant that reparations for the war on drugs should be the starting point, should be the basis for any conversation on cannabis decriminalization or legalization. Because the other thing people, I got into the weeds on this a little bit, part of the decrim conversation at the federal level is because the federal cannabis companies can't write off their business expenditures like other businesses because it's federally illegal, the so-called 280E provision. So a big part of what they're doing is they're trying to get a tax break for big cannabis companies, but they're selling it to us like it's criminal justice reform. The reality is very few people are locked up for cannabis possession right now. They're generally locked up for possession when they intend to distribute. So even the highly touted commission of sentences by folks like Governor West, which we support, that didn't touch intent to distribute charges. So we need to have a degree of precision and know when we actually have the ability to leverage concessions on something like demanding investments in the communities where most of the arrest happened as the preconditions for any conversation on decrim or legalization, because otherwise we're just going to get our suffering being used as part of the interest convergence to drive a corporate agenda.
No, I think that's a really good point. And, you see the only thing that moves the Republicans on this issue is like the marijuana banking. And it's like, we can't, God forbid the banks aren't able to make huge sums of money off the legalization of marijuana. Well, we want to, get into another issue here. And we're very happy to be joined by a guest we were able to talk to a couple days ago, and that is immigration. Of course, we'll be back with our panel in just a little bit on this and many more things. But, you hear a lot about immigration here in the United States from the American perspective. We wanted to get it from the other side of the border, from the Mexican perspective, and we were very honored to have the opportunity to talk to a few days ago Alina Duarte, who's a journalist in Mexico. She also works at the National Training Institute for Morena, which is the ruling party there, about how people in Mexico are seeing the conversation and the discourse around getting tough on the border and immigration in the United States. And as we continue our coverage here of all the issues relevant to everything happening at the Democratic National Convention, to talk more on a number of issues flowing from the immigration issue, we are very, very honored to be joined here by Alina Duarte, who is a journalist at de Raíz Media and also the international coordinator at the National Institute of Political Training of Morena, the ruling party of Mexico. As always, Alina, great to have you join us.
Thanks for inviting me, Eugene.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, and as I'm sure you are very aware, Mexico, the U.S.-Mexico border, and many different issues flowing from that are very much in the news here, very much relevant to how both candidates in the U.S. election are positioning themselves. But obviously, there's been this huge rise in fear-mongering and, right-wing talking points, terrorists, drug traffickers, human trafficking, all these different issues that are there, other than why people are actually migrating, the real reasons. But I just wonder, maybe initially just to talk, how does all this rhetoric look from the Mexican side of the border when you see how the U.S. elections are being pitched on immigration?
Well, first, I must say that what is worrying, I think, is not necessarily Mexico, but the United States, and the need to show us that politics is increasingly going to the right. That's basically what we are talking now here in Mexico. I think for the first time, or at least in the last 6 years, this is the first time that I really think, or I feel that people wants to know what's going on in the U.S. in terms of electoral issues. Because in any other moment, and you might know better than me, there are differences between Democrats and Republicans inside the U.S., but outside the foreign policy of the U.S., it's always the same with us. So this is the first time I said at least in the last 6 years that we've been talking specifically with the president every single morning or every time he wants to talk about that, the relationship between Mexico and the U.S., but in other terms, not in terms of U.S. imperialism, but in what Mexico needs. And during this government, we've seen a lot of changes in a lot of issues, specifically on foreign policy. So definitely, I think, and I'm gonna say something that it's not really popular, but I remember 4 years ago that a lot of Mexicans were talking about supporting, for example, Donald Trump because he was kind of friend of Andres Manuel López Obrador because he found how to deal with this bilateral relationship. But now the people here in Mexico, we are talking about what Kamala Harris is doing or has been doing, not only as vice president but in her whole life. Who is Donald Trump? Who is Joseph Biden? So I think a lot of things are changing here in Mexico, specifically on the debate.
Well, one of the things that I think is notable and that we don't hear a lot about, I sort of alluded to it in my first question to you, is why people are actually trying to come to the United States. I mean, I think there's so much demonization of Central American countries, Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti. Everyone says the Mexican drug cartels are bringing people here. But it seems like, I think for many people, that's not the reality of the migrant experience. And, the vast majority of migrants are coming from the Americas still. What are some of the issues that are actually really driving these flows?
Well, 30 years of neoliberalism isn't easy to explain in some minutes, but basically, since the signing of the free trade agreement in Mexico with the US and Canada, we know that Mexico and the whole region was devastated. We cannot deny, for example, that our economy was based on the plundering of the US, on the surrender of our resources, on the theft of our lands. And not only in Mexico, but in the whole region. It's very difficult sometimes to know when an economic process started, but neoliberalism started in the region. In Chile, when Salvador Allende was assassinated, and specifically in Mexico during the 80s, with the sign of this trade agreement, we see everything changing. The working class was devastated, and not only in Mexico, I must insist, but in the whole region. So after that, of course, migration was part of our lives, was part of the life of our countries. And now it's something that has been changing in the region for the last at least 20 years, starting with this so-called progressive government in the region that allowed us to say now that 70 million of people now they are not in poverty anymore. And in Mexico, it's exactly the same now. During the last 6 years, poverty has decreased 5 million. 5 million people now, they are not in poverty anymore. There is still a lot of change, a lot of problems, I must say, but now migration is not as big as it was 6 years ago. But this is what corporate media doesn't say anytime. All the time they are saying that we are the problem, that Mexicans or Latin Americans are wanting to experience the American dream, but they don't say that the devastation was originated by the US. So I think we should be talking about these progressive governments now in the region that are trying to change these problems in different way.
Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum is the incoming president there in Mexico. And of course, she is continuing to, or promising to sort of continue, but also build on and accelerate many of the changes that have been called the fourth transformation, starting with President AMLO, the current president. So I wonder if you are anticipating any changes, any more friction between the U.S. government and the Mexican government. I know, for instance, the U.S. government has expressed some concern over the quote-unquote Plan C reforms, but obviously there are a lot of different facets to U.S.-Mexican relations. Are you expecting more tension, more of the same? What do you think?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen in the U.S. in the next elections, but at least here in Mexico, I think our government is taking some kind of steps in migration specifically. Claudia Sheinbaum, also Andres Manuel López Obrador, have been talking with other countries in the region, specifically with Colombia, with Central America countries, to see all the processes or the plans that they have to build in terms of migration, but not only about that, also about human trafficking, about, for example, poverty. So they have tried to generate new programs, and that's something really amazing for me to see that now Mexico is collaborating also with Belize, with Honduras, with Central America, but also with Cuba. In other terms, not talking about money, but talking about collaboration, cooperation. There are a lot of social programs that are going on now in Mexico, and there are also around 20,000 people in Honduras, 20,000 people in El Salvador who are receiving these social programs created in Mexico to help people and, to try to avoid migration, but in other terms, not in terms of security issues as the U.S. always does. Is something really different, and it's something that it's working nowadays. Also, they're trying to reduce poverty. They are talking, for example, something that I was really surprised about was 2 years ago when Andrés Manuel López Obrador was talking about working among equal countries. It's not something easy when you know about the U.S. imperialism, but it's something that he was saying even when in front of the U.S. President Joe Biden, even with Donald Trump. And also, Mexican economy is growing, so it's not that easy for the U.S. now to say something and to impose economical policies or something like that. So I think Claudia Sheinbaum is doing exactly the same. She has been talking about something that I don't really like, this nearshoring. It's some kind of a neo-colonial economy, but at the same time, it's with all the migration here in Mexico, it's something that might be useful for giving jobs to all of these thousands of migrants are in Mexico, so it's a little more complicated. So now Mexico is in another situation than it was 6 years ago, and I think Claudia Sheinbaum is in the same line, in the same ideology as AMLO was in terms of cooperation. Something that might be. I don't know if a surprise for others, but for example, for us, it's really good to listen that he invited Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping for the next October the 1st. That is the day when AMLO is leaving president the power. So let's see how it goes. But I'm really calm. I'm really happy to see that there is some kind of continuity with the next president, Claudia Sheinbaum.
Mm-hmm. And, obviously there's, I think, roughly 35 million people of Mexican heritage in the United States of America. I know you've reported in the United States. You've been in contact with many Mexican Americans here in the U.S. How are they feeling in this electoral season with so much being, put against immigrants? What's the feeling that you've been able to pick up from folks you know?
Well, I think it's even more than 35 millions of Mexican. Now people are saying that we are around 42 millions of Mexican from first and second generation. So you can imagine how important for us is to get in contact with all of them. So we're trying to make some spaces of debate with all of them. So now 4 years ago, I remember there was some kind of confusion when seeing that Donald Trump was kind of helping Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and they were saying that he was AMLO's friend or something like that. So they were calling 4 years ago for voting for Donald Trump. It was a really, I don't even know how to say it, but it was, some kind of confusing even for me. So now people are debating what's the best, not only for migrants, but for the rest of the world. It's so hard to see that with Joe Biden. You could expect a lot of support both for Democrats and Republicans when it comes about Israel and the genocide. But in terms of the population, the Mexican population in the U.S. now, they are debating that Donald Trump might be worst in several ways. for population in the rest of the world, not only in the US, but Mexico, Latin America. So I see a lot of support. Unfortunately, I mean, I'm not trying to support Republicans, but I see a lot of support of Mexican population for Democrats, for Kamala Harris. They don't really know, they are not, and it's something that I must talk with people, with socialist people in the US. We need to create these debates, these spaces, to know that there is not only Democrats and Republicans. Unfortunately, there are millions of Mexicans that don't really know that there is another option, or that we need to build another platform against the establishment. So for now, I think most of them are supporting Kamala Harris. They know that it's, and I'm really proud of them when I see that now they are reacting, and it's something really beautiful against imperialism. But also when, for example, the New York Times and the Washington Post are attacking the so-called for transformation, the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, they've been protesting at the New York Times. They have been, they are going to the New York Times, to Washington Post, to every single place they can express that they are not agree with what they are doing. So I think that there are more consciousness now of Mexicans about the process in Mexico, because as I said, after 30 years of neoliberalism, people were going to the U.S. expecting to experience the American dream, but now they are supporting the government of Mexico. They are more aware of what's going on, the relationship between Mexico and the U.S., but we need to build a movement in the U.S. specifically against imperialism, with more than 40 millions of Mexicans living there.
Well, I'll tell you, that would be the political earthquake of all time for sure. So it will be very interesting to see it develop, interesting to see it watch. As always, really appreciate all your coverage on Mexico, all of Latin America, and your insights on the U.S. Alina, thanks so much for being with us here on the show.
My pleasure, Eugene, and thanks you and all the team of Breakthrough News.
We are back here, special coverage of the DNC on Breakthrough News and Free Speech TV. Rania Khalek is with us now, also from Breakthrough News. Rania, good morning. Oh, you're muted. Oh, I can't hear you, Rania. Can you hear me? She can hear me, but I cannot hear her. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll work on that. We'll come back to that. Obviously, we want to have Rania Khalek with us from Lebanon, very bravely joining us at 3 a.m. So we really appreciate that. But that is her level of dedication to this business we call news. Well, we want to transition here in a second, but I did just want to make one quick note. Obviously, that was Alina Duarte, journalist from Mexico, based in Mexico City, also works with the ruling party of Morena there, about the Mexican side of how things are being seen in terms of migration and U.S.-Mexico relations. That was obviously a big theme at the DNC last night, was immigration, and there's more to say and that we can say about that. But I just want to note one quick fact before we move to another issue. Kamala Harris was allegedly supposed to heavily address the issue of root causes of immigration that she herself noted included poverty and other needs for investment in Central American countries. Just really quickly, and also the Caribbean, I want to note, in 2023, the United States gave $240 million to foreign aid to Guatemala. $240 million to Guatemala. They gave $520 million in foreign aid to Haiti, only $73 million for economic development, and they gave $720 million in foreign aid to Honduras. Now, those might sound like big numbers to you and I. We would like to have a lot of that money, but just to note, in 2023, they gave $17 billion in foreign aid, and that's not all the money to Ukraine. So, allegedly immigration, one of the biggest issues. Kamala Harris made a big point as vice president of saying we have to deal with root causes, but they could only give a fraction of the amount of aid to countries like Guatemala, Haiti, and Honduras to help people survive and have economic development that they could give to Ukraine for a proxy war. So again, an interesting note on priorities and an interesting note on how she's being presented. But of course, Kamala Harris, who will speak tonight in the DNC, a lot lot going on here in her campaign. One issue, of course, has been how this is roiling black politics in and of itself, relationships between black men and black women. What is the real black agenda? There's so many different pieces to that. We were very, very happy to be joined to talk more about that a couple days ago by Tef Poe, rapper, musician, organizer, and executive director of the Boycott Times about all of this. And as we continue our conversations here about everything swirling around the Democratic National Convention, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Tef Poe, rapper, musician, organizer, and executive director of the Boycott Times. Tef, thanks so much for being with us, man.
Peace and love, y'all. Peace and love. Peace and love. Thanks for having me.
Well, I wanted to check in with you on this issue that is, at least in the media, a big deal. The whole issue of black men, how they're relating to Kamala Harris, how they're relating to Trump, what's happening with the election. And I guess the first question I wanted to ask you is this a real issue, I guess? I mean, there's a lot of discussion about it, differences between black men, black women, how it's playing out in the election. But is it something that's being kind of pumped up by the media, or is there's something to the story?
I think I think in American society, between men and women in general, we have several issues placating from patriarchy, sexism, and so on and so on. So, yes, there are real issues between black men and black women on a societal level. But also in terms of a general political body, I like to think that we're a little bit more unified than the mainstream media would like to suggest.
One of the things I think is interesting in terms of this broader conversation, how it's looked, and especially, sort of how we even define the black vote, black voters, is, how black people are relating to the two-party system in and of itself. And I think that's one of the issues, maybe a bigger issue for Kamala Harris than how many black people are going to vote for Trump. But like really, realistically, especially under the age of 40, especially under the age of 35, are either party really connecting with young black men?
Well, it's not my job to say whether or not Kamala Harris is a real black woman. I think that's a ludicrous conversation, but that's one of Donald Trump's talking points, right? But what I do know is that the Democratic Party is forcing out quote unquote real black women. If you see what just happened to Cori Bush, what they're attempting to do to Ilhan, from both sides of the fence, black women candidates face manipulation and constipulation. They have no friend in either party. So we're now in a position as black male educated voters that know that this is how the playing field is being set up, that to a small degree we're witnessing legalized election interference sometimes with what's going on with the way that these women are being removed from the party. So we have to really just analyze the whole situation from a different lens and be a little bit smarter. A lot of brothers claim that they support Trump from a revolutionary stance or more of a radicalized alternative political stance. Personally, I think we got to be honest about that. You're not a revolutionary, you're a capitalist. And I think you don't have any analyzation around your actual politics.
And what are the politics that you think are really are speaking to, or could be, or should be speaking to, it's in a way like, how do you take such a huge subset of people, but sort of young black males, at least as have they been tagged in that umbrella, people say, well, we need to reach them, we need to touch them, we need to talk to them more significantly. What are the things that people are concerned about and that they, I think, want to hear more of if they're going to engage politically?
Well, I think we got to start with black fathers. I don't have any children, but I do think that what I hear a lot from our base is that black fathers are looking for options for themselves and their children. I think also that there is a growing base of young men coming out of high school who know that college won't be an option for them, right? And they're looking at the American workforce and saying, okay, where do I fit into this thing? Can I pick up a trade? Where do my skills best serve society without doing any harm? I think that we have a will to serve the world in a helpful capacity, but I also think that the politics of the day need to be honest about how they've utilized us as a base of people as well, in terms of mass incarceration, the war on drugs, so forth and so on. There's never been any amends for some of these things.
And, here we are 10 years later after Mike Brown's murder, assassination, what happened in Ferguson, which, really upended the entire world and showed a different face of community not willing to stand down anymore. I think so much of where we are now in 2024, we had everything that happened from Ferguson to 2020, and now we're sort of in this sort of backlash politics. I guess maybe the broader question I'm asking here is, how should that be affecting the political arena? It feels like so many people are willing to just leave this by the wayside and forget that ever happened. But how important is it that we continue to inject the politics of the street that was injected into the politics of society by these movements like Ferguson, like Baltimore, like what we saw in Minneapolis and so on?
Well, a lot of people have been asking me what's changed in the 10 years that, since the death of Michael Brown and the eruption of Ferguson. And I'm quick to say, well, what's changed in America in 10 years? Because Ferguson is just a place contextualized within St. Louis, which is contextualized within Missouri, which is contextualized within the United States of America. So a lot of times what we get too caught up in doing, especially when Black folks or other oppressed people are the topic, we get really microscopic about the issues. So for me, what I've seen change is that there's a cultural desire amongst the people for real options. There's a fight in the people that hasn't quite yet died. There's a thirst for political education amongst people, alternative ideas, different ways to do things. And I also think that right there is the bolt in the machine that the Democratic Party is really trying to figure out how to twist while also being true to their base about who they actually are. A war-adjacent, anti-people, anti-human rights party. So I know sometimes I sound a bit harsh to people, but I didn't write the history. And sometimes what people think about you 100 years from now matters a lot more than what they think about you 100 days from now.
And, Ferguson was also a moment that re-injected Palestinian liberation in a big way into the body politic. It revived the long history of Black Palestinian solidarity. It seems like now there are some ne'er-do-wells around the edges who want to try to drive a wedge between Black community and the Palestinian community over this issue of Kamala Harris. There's maybe not a question in that, but I wonder how you're reflecting on both this history and this legacy of Black Palestinian solidarity and the potential pitfalls and dangers of how that could play out in the electoral arena.
Yeah, this is a real topic right now in the progressive community. I was just stomping the yard with Cori Bush, who was attacked by AIPAC because she had such a strong pro-Palestinian stance. I was roommates with Bassem Masri, the deceased Ferguson Palestinian activist and live streamer and journalist and so forth. So I have personal investment beyond the politics because once your opposition becomes my opposition, the ideology seems to stop mattering for me. We're both ducking the same bullets. We're both ducking the same bombs now. So that's what I really want to raise in the wake of this conversation, is that for progressive Jewish voices in the world, we do have a seat at the table for you. We are not building this innately anti-anybody machinery based upon the liberation notion for Palestine as an occupied territory. And I want to raise that in a real way right here, right now, because I think that this is being weaponized against us in so many ways as a movement with false narratives. And we're witnessing some really terrible things happen that are splintering so many different styles of communities based upon lies and deception.
One of the things, speaking of lies and deception, and you alluded to this earlier, and I think your first answer, I saw a poll recently that Black people under 45 28% said they would potentially vote for Trump. I mean, I wonder what you think is behind that. And like insofar, especially the point you made about capitalism, that we really have to make sure we interject sort of the politics of class, as it were, into our understanding of what's happening in Black politics in 2024.
Yeah. The thing is, people don't want to be considered poor. The ideology of the poor, the word poor in American society is disgusting. But the reality of the circumstances is that there are a lot more of the underclass than there are the oligarchs. And I think that we're witnessing something happen at a very hyper speed where they're modeling the billionaire, they're modeling this and modeling that through social media. And the common person is going to the store with this type of inflation on their back in a almost dystopian style society where you can't even afford the eggs this week. You can't even afford the bread this week. People are at home actually treating their groceries like rations. I worked overseas in Amman, Jordan as a cultural ambassador with the United States government, kind of being a spook who sat by the door. And when I got over there, I caused a lot of trouble. But I was just very inquisitive about that world. And I saw how those people were living. And I said, this isn't that different than life in North St. Louis. There's a lot of symmetry between what's going on in the so-called third world and the so-called ghetto, or the so-called dilapidated suburbia. And I think that is what the oligarchical class fears. It doesn't matter who they are at this point, because when the people are hungry, the people are hungry. And eventually, what I do think will happen, my brother, is that the people are going to rise up out of their material circumstances. I can't tell you when, how, but watch this presidential election. This is going to be the most unusual election that we've seen in our lifetime, and we're just getting started.
Well, it's going to be very, very interesting to see, very, very interesting to watch, and very, very interesting to be in this new world post-November 5th. But Tef, as always, I really appreciate you. Hope everyone is checking out the Boycott Times, and just thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the show.
Thank you, brother.
Peace.
Peace.
And you are back live here, Free Speech TV, Breakthrough News, special DNC coverage. We've got Katie Halper, host of the Katie Halper Show, Lawrence Grandpre, director of research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Rania Khalek is with us. Now, I'm just going to jump right in here as we go. We're making our jobs for our panelists as hard as possible by giving them plenty to respond to. Katie, I want to kind of just go to another issue, but anything you want to say about any of the pre-recorded interviews, I'm happy to hear from you. But to pick up on something that Tef Poe said at the end of his interview about the role of uprisings in this country, obviously he mentioned the defeat of Cori Bush, which points to sort of a broader thing. We've seen it with others. You had the AIPAC sort of, massive funds combining with the cryptocurrency industry here to take her out. It was a similar thing with Jamal Bowman as well, who is someone who in a very different way, but in his own right, emerged from sort of everything that was happening around the rise in consciousness of criminal justice. Neither of them were protected in any way, shape, or form by the Democratic establishment. I mean, what do you think that really says about the message being sent by the leadership at the DCCC, the DNC, and elsewhere?
Well, I mean, I think it just reveals how morally bankrupt the leadership is. These are people who, in the case of Cori Bush, I mean, she's been speaking out against this consistently for years. Jamal Bowman has been less focused on it, but he also said some great stuff recently. But even just calling for a ceasefire is unacceptable for the DNC. And again, we're seeing this reflected in the actual convention, the way that Palestinians have been totally sidelined. And also, I want to just clarify one thing. Earlier, I kind of made fun of the fact that they had this special Palestinian panel. And I didn't mean any disrespect to the people who participated in it, because I think that it was valuable in many ways. I'm just trying to point out how kind of disgusting it is that they thought that that was the sufficient way to highlight what the Palestinian experience is right now. But, in terms of what other speakers were saying, going back to the theme of immigration, Eugene, you remind us of Kamala Harris's assignment that she was going to get to the so-called root causes of immigration. And of course, she never talks about sanctions. She never talks about our economic policies that destabilizes these nations. She never talks about how we support dictatorships and help destabilize these regions. I think her big genius policy initiative was literally telling people in Central America, do not come. That was it.
Yeah. No, I was actually in Haiti when they made one of those declarations, do not come. Unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and they made a Biden version, right, in French. I thought it was, honestly, it said "do not come," and I thought it was some leftists making fun of Biden's immigration policy, but it was actually real, made by the Biden administration social media team.
Well, Lawrence, I want to ask you the same question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rania Khalek. But some of your thoughts about the messaging being sent here, and I don't know if you want to comment on it, but I feel like the sort of cryptocurrency angle of this has not been hit as much as the AIPAC angle. But it's amazing, $100 million, biggest super PAC in America is the cryptocurrency one.
Yeah, you saw a lot at us. I'm gonna try to synthesize it as much as possible. So, Black-brown solidarity is very important, but it's not a guarantee. Baltimore's gone from about 2% Black to about 8% Black, and there are some older Black folk who, again, think of the trauma of mass incarceration during the crack era. They get concerned because they feel like the jobs that normally go to Black folk are going to different people. That's what Trump was going for with his "they're taking Black jobs" comments. So I think that it's important to realize that the war on drugs immiserated the Black community, just as it has completely immiserated Latin America. I've been to the border. I've seen those conditions. That you not just make that journey, but potentially pay to make that journey by paying a coyote. The level of immiseration is wild, and we need to unify like we've tried to do in Baltimore. In Baltimore, one of the top Latinx serving organizations, CASA, wrote from the liberation theology tradition, a lot of support for Salvadorian immigrants. They wrote a letter saying that what America was doing in Gaza was really bad. And the Democratic administration threatened to cut off their government grants, saying that they were too political. And they're a nonprofit, we're not. So we wrote a letter saying that's messed up, and they didn't cut their funding, right? So we've worked a lot with CASA on police accountability, and I think that seeing the unity on issues like police accountability between Black and Brown is important. And it's important that we have an economic agenda that really empowers every community. So to conclude, like when we wrote the part of Maryland's bill, when they legalized cannabis, that reinvested tax revenue into communities most impacted by the war on drugs. But the idea is that every community knows what they need, and no one bureaucrat or technocrat or any person can dictate to them what they need. So that's going to allow the Latinx community to have some control over the funds that goes to them, and allow the Black community to have controls over the funds that go to them. So this idea of bottom-up democracy, I believe, can address some of that attempt to turn Black folk against brown folk.
I think that from everything I've seen, and my apologies for being a bit late, it is quite late my time, but I think that at the end of the day, the theme here is this corporate-run party cannot address these issues. And you see it, I think, now in the sort of big controversy on the sidelines of the DNC around the uncommitted delegates and not letting a Palestinian speak on stage. And I'm of a few minds here. I mean, how are you supposed to, in a party that has spent the last 10 plus months enthusiastically arming Israel to blow up Palestinian children in Gaza for 10 plus months, and enthusiastically so, how on earth can that party be an umbrella party that also represents the constituency of people whose families are being blown up? And that, to me, speaks to a irreconcilable issue within this party, not just with regard to Palestine, but with regard to immigration, with regard to mass incarceration, with regard to all the issues that we've been talking about between yesterday and today on this live stream about the DNC. And that is that they are not capable of addressing these issues because they are a part of the problem, and they will continue to be a part of the problem. And I think this also goes to an ongoing debate about whether you can be of that sort of reformist camp of like, no, we'll be on the inside and we'll push them. But I just haven't seen any evidence that you can push them. In fact, the opposite seems to be true. The Democratic Party has, for the last several decades, continued to move to the right, to the point where they can't even give 2 minutes to a Palestinian speaker who basically wants to endorse Kamala Harris to be on stage because they don't want someone to call for a ceasefire and an arms embargo. I mean, it's just such a ridiculous conversation to be having at this point, especially in the context of genocide. The idea that, the Democratic Party can somehow represent people who support Israel while also representing people, a genocidal apartheid state that wants to continue to commit genocide while also representing people whose families are being blown up by Israel. It's just not possible. And the Democratic Party is telling us it's not possible, and that they refuse to make it possible. I don't know. Anyone jump in who wants to there. Sorry. I don't know, Katie, if you want to add something to that. I guess I was just going on a rant because I was kind of catching up before I joined the stream on some of the latest news. And it's just so absurd that for 2 nights, the Democrats have said no to a Palestinian speaking. But the idea of even like, why even speak at this point? They don't want you to. And they literally support your genocide.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this earlier that I thought it was really pathetic and insulting that they had a panel. That was the way that they addressed this issue. I understand. I think that there's a debate out there over whether or not it's okay to participate in that. I mean, you could make a strategic argument. I think that they're going to, speaking at the DNC, would have given visibility to this issue. Or you could make the argument, yeah, but you shouldn't be even participating in a convention that's being held by people who are, perpetuating, funding, legitimizing, and coordinating this genocide. But yeah, I think it is, it's something else that I wanted to bring up actually about the DNC is that as you guys at Breakthrough News have been covering, Israel has been engaged in a actual kind of a rape rampage. They've been raping and sexually assaulting detainees. And not only that, but the response to an attempt to arrest those soldiers who had engaged in that rape was to literally protest for the right to rape. Then you also saw a Knesset member say that it was legitimate to insert sticks into people's rectums. And then you had some of the sexual violence actually broadcast by Israeli media. And the fact that the DNC platform actually addressed sexual violence, they actually addressed sexual violence in their platform, but the way they addressed it was they said under the heading of response to the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel and next steps to a lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians. And it said, President Biden and Vice President Harris have unequivocally denounced Hamas's brutal attack on Israel on October 7th, condemned the gruesome violence, including conflict-related sexual violence, demonstrated by Hamas, and made clear that the United States wants to see Hamas defeated. The fact that they could bring up sexual violence of the debunked rape story about Hamas's mass weaponization of rape, the fact that they could bring that up and not even pretend to care about the actual rapes that have been documented by not only the victims, but also by B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, which just put out a report called Welcome to Hell about how rampant torture and sexual violence is. I mean, it's stunning. And it's a reminder, again, of how dehumanized Palestinians are by these people, and how they don't care about rape or sexual violence or women's rights, because if they did, they'd be talking about the large, very newsworthy story of not only rape, but riots in support of rapists. And the Knesset member saying out loud, this was not leaked audio, he said out loud during a session that it was legitimate to insert sticks into someone's rectum.
Yeah, I mean, it's stunning on many different ways. And just to pick up on that point, as Politico is reporting now that there will not be, it seems, any Palestinian speaker. Not that we thought they would get one at the last second, but it seems like Politico.
Well, can I just ask a question? I just kind of want to ask a question, and it's more just rhetorical, I guess. But let's walk this through. let's say they were like, you know what? Give them 2 minutes. Let some Palestinian come up and speak. I think there was like somebody they had put forward. It was a state representative from Georgia who is a Palestinian woman, Palestinian American woman. Let's say they say, okay, you have 2 minutes to speak. And she comes up and speaks, gives her speech. I think I saw like a printout of what her speech was going to be. It was something like, calling for a ceasefire, I don't even think I saw a call for an arms embargo, and that like a kind of endorsement of President Kamala Harris for president, and that this party is all of us coming together, and we can, and it was referencing of Fannie Lou Hamer and the integration of the Democratic Party, and kind of like making a reference to from then to now, I guess, of we can be an integrated party that represents all of us. Let's walk that through. Then what? So everybody just ends up saying, like, is that supposed to fold the uncommitted vote into the Democratic Party that's given nothing in return? I don't understand. And then what? Does it cancel out the Democratic Party's not just last 10 plus months of leading the enthusiastic support for arming a genocide, but continuing to do so because they have no plans to stop, right? So what does that mean? Then what? What do you do? There's no leverage anymore. You're just going to support a party because Donald Trump while they're genociding people? Yeah. I don't understand what the end game is, I guess. And I don't know. I know you guys don't necessarily have the answer to that. But I think it goes back to my original point, which is I believe this party to be this situation. These are irreconcilable issues. I cannot, and I think a lot of people cannot, be a part of a party under an umbrella that includes people who support my genocide or the genocide of anybody for that matter.
Yeah. And if we go back to the Fannie Lou Hamer example, she spoke, but they gave them 2 token delegates and they walked out. So after that, they went back to Mississippi, and the way it gets narrated is that they fell outside of history. They fell outside of politics. She worked for community self-determination for years to build political power, but also tying it to meeting people's direct needs. So Black folks, we've been in an incremental relationship with the Democratic Party since we got to this goddamn country, right? So it's obviously not to say that the struggles are the same. It's to say that what we know is the only thing they're going to respond to is primary pressure. A lot of the people who are most susceptible to hear this message are so disaffected that they don't vote in primaries. And I'm just trying to think how we can get people to vote in these primaries, right? So that's why we are desperately trying to tie things like not just the idea of reparations, but concrete investments in the people who have been targeted by the war on drugs, the people who don't turn out, and frankly, the people who are blamed for the Democrats not winning when we know poor working class Black folk, they die at disproportionate rates and they're in jail. So they literally can't vote. And they're blaming us for not voting when we literally can't. But how do we get a policy agenda that is appealing enough for them to vote, but they also trust that we actually will enforce it enough to get them to vote in a primary? Because so many of the people that are full bore against the Democratic Party machine, we need them to either invest in the third party, which I think is also, we've canvassed for Green Party candidates, but also if there is a primary challenge, how do we get past this dynamic where the people we most need to invest in primary voting are the least likely to show up? And I think that really is challenging this sort of simplistic playbook and really targeting investments, targeting very specific investments people can feel in their communities, and really demonstrating a record of following through and then tying that to this larger agenda.
I think that's such an important point. Well, one, I'm glad you brought up the issue of people saying Fannie Lou Hamer fell out of history. One of my favorite stories is Amari Obadele's Free the Land memoir. He's the president of the Republic of New Africa. In the middle of the 1970s, they're in some protest, and after the protest, they go to somebody who'd opened their home, just a citizen, to those who had been out there protesting. He says he gets there and he realizes it was Fannie Lou Hamer's house. There's a number of other interesting stories like that. But I want to ask you a follow-up on that too, Lawrence, that I think is interesting because, night one, everyone was talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. Actually, as we've been talking here, Al Sharpton was speaking, and he said this is going to be Shirley Chisholm's dream tonight. Obviously, also on night one, there was the encomiums for the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was there, who they brought on stage. Maybe I'll just leave it there. What do you think about all this civil rights iconography and the way it's playing into the DNC?
A wise man once said, John Henrik Clarke, you find the people's greatest strengths, you find their greatest weakness. Particularly to civil rights iconography, Black folks have a veneration of our elders and a veneration of the people that struggled and died for us to get to where we've gotten. But the Democratic Party uses that cultural affiliation to effectively tie us to visions of politics that really oftentimes denature and distort that history, but more than anything else, play upon the fear of things getting worse rather than the reality that the civil rights movement was fundamentally incomplete. The investments in the economic redistribution that King and X were pushing to at the end of their lives were the logical conclusion to the civil rights movement that were not ended with bullets, but ended with co-option into things like the nonprofit industrial complex and the Democratic Party. So while recognizing this machine has been a part of our history, it was not the blood that was spilled was not for this Democratic Party. It was for the liberation of people that exceeds what this party can accommodate. So again, when we talk about concrete policy agendas, what can we do to specifically get money to the ground? So we look at things like the model cities as an example. As imperfect as it was, so much of our elders, movement elders, said that things like model cities were in Baltimore, where the community controlled that money and invested it in community-controlled institutions, was a powerful example of federal government policy actually benefiting community. So we're trying to replicate things like that with state money, with things like this Community Restoration Fund. But we know that's not enough money. We know that's never going to be enough money, but as a heuristic, as a way of thinking about empowering community, giving people control and engaging them in a democratic process, that's how we begin to build pipelines of leadership for the left, like they're building pipelines on the right and frankly on the center. So we call ourselves a think tank to really counter not just heritage, but also people like Center for American Progress, the way they've built these pipelines over years and years and years. And things like model cities were our pipeline. And now we need to figure out what we as a left can begin to build that begins to rebuild those pipelines, that manifest the real conclusion of that civil rights, Black power, Black liberation movement trajectory.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it'll be interesting to see if I hope we're still not having this conversation in another like 20 or 30 years. But could you imagine some Democratic convention in 20 or 30 years where they're just like making reference to some Palestinian, like from 20 or 30 years ago, and it's all
They'll reference the woman they didn't let speak. They'll say, remember her.
Yeah. Or the woman who got hit on the head by a Joe Biden sign.
Right.
I mean, it's really, the Democratic Party, I will give them this. They're not stupid. They are very good at adapting, at co-opting, and at creating this culture where, the lowest common denominator, I guess, it's just they do a very good job to the point where you'll see these delegates just like kind of follow in like sheep. Like I'm sure everybody saw that video, which breakthrough news is Kate Pritsker got yesterday. I don't know if you already talked about it before I came on, of those delegates walking through, the Democratic delegates kind of like walking past protesters who were reading out the names of Palestinian children who'd been killed by the Israelis, which, to go through those names would take a very long time. And the attitude was to shut their ears, to roll their eyes, like they were so inconvenienced. Yeah, one in particular was mocking them. It was like really shocking to watch. And I mean, I know that actually the Democratic base, the majority of them do support a ceasefire, are opposed to Israel's actions, do even see this as a genocide. So I don't want to suggest that those delegates in particular represent the Democratic Party's base as a whole, but they certainly represent a segment of Democratic Party elites who do not care, who this is a party for them. They just want to party and enjoy a world where they're in charge without Donald Trump, a world with empty rhetorical gestures of equality, of diversity, but that doesn't actually do anything to address any major issues that we've discussed here. And this is the party they are. This is who they are. This is the party they will continue to be. And then that just becomes a bigger conversation about that we've been having as long as I can remember about whether, it's wise to be working within this party or to be building something outside of it.
Yeah, well, Katie Halper, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about how, Rania just brought up the fact that most of the Democratic base does oppose what Israel's doing now. And Eugene, you brought up earlier how the death penalty, or opposition to the death penalty, is not included, although it has been in past conventions. And it's just so dystopian to think that they are overtly going backwards. And this is at a time when the death penalty is at an all-time level of unpopularity. So it's not even politically expedient. It's morally reprehensible. It's also, I oppose the death penalty in principle. I think it's barbaric, but it's also a very classist and racist thing. And okay, I don't expect Kamala Harris to really care about class issues, and she obviously doesn't care about racism because she perpetuates it herself. But I would expect her to pay lip service to not supporting a racist, literal system of death. But they're so entitled and have no moral compass whatsoever. It's just insane that they're going backwards on this issue.
Yeah, and to relate to that, I want to pick up on something. I made a note about it that you said in your very first comment, Lawrence, about the vote totals going down in places like Milwaukee. We've seen the same in Chicago. I looked at this in 2022, and it was like every kind of majority black area. But one thing that really stood out to me, Jim Clyburn in 2020, so presidential year when the vote is the highest, only won 45% of registered voters. And I think this is certainly true of black politicians, but it's true, I think, maybe across the board. Is there sort of a fallacy that's also put forward, not just by the political system, by the media, that if you win, you represent X community? This person is from this place and they're the congressperson, so their views are somehow reflective of the views of people, and we should then read into a community what that politician is saying.
Yeah, it's very convenient to homogenize a community based upon a particular candidate. I've always thought about the Gil Scott-Heron quote where he talks about Reagan and talks about all the people who didn't vote. Majority of people didn't vote for Reagan, so no one has a mandate. No one's president. And I think that's especially true in these urban communities where 90% of the vote might go to a Democrat, but the turnout is so relatively low compared to the suburban areas that the majority of people in these areas are clearly stating, we do not affirm this system of politics, period. And that's the message that we build our organization off of. We are trying to give people something worth supporting. And that means that we oftentimes have to fight with the Democrats in the state, the Democrats in this Democrat trifecta state. And I think that, even stuff like the left, I was at Netroots, and Baltimore is the fatal overdose capital of America. 1,000 people overdose here every year, 3 times more than people that shot and murdered. And there wasn't a single panel on overdose, because I think right now it's coding as those are the people that want to criminalize fentanyl sales. Those are the people who are right-wing conservatives. And I think that the vote totals are decreasing in Baltimore because people are literally dying and are not there to vote anymore, in addition to some middle-class black flight as well. And it's just such a stark distinction, because I think even amongst some of the progressive left or some of the technocratic suburban liberals, we see criminalize fentanyl distribution, give them murder charges if people OD. We see those bills coming from so-called progressives here in Maryland. We see those bills coming not just from the center, right? So I think even the left has to deal with some of its issues around its feelings of unsafety and its inability to fully accommodate the complexity of these issues. Because Kamala's talking about prosecuting cartels we don't know selling drugs is a response to survival economics, both in Latin America and here in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to come back to our panel in just a bit. We want to bring in India Walton, senior strategist with RootsAction, to give us some words here. We really appreciate her joining us. India, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you here. One of the things that I've honestly been thinking a lot about for the past several weeks prior to the DNC really was your groundbreaking mayoral run there in Buffalo, where you won the primary and then the establishment, strikes back against you. And I was thinking about it because of what obviously happened to Cori Bush, and, also what we saw with Jamal Bowman, where despite the fact they were incumbents, you were not an incumbent, just a community member, but the role of, sort of the core establishment of the Democratic Party, it seems, targeting progressive Black people with a strong working class agenda. And I wonder just how, seeing some of this year, how you're reflecting on that, having been, attacked in very similar ways.
In New York with Congressman Bowman, and in St. Louis with Cori Bush, and I liken it to looking in a mirror. It's the same playbook, and it is about big money and corporations and the lobby versus everyday working class people who, folks will tell you that they want more of us to run for office, but when it comes down to it, they don't want someone in power that's going to deliver for the people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it says so much when you bring it back to the issue of the sort of corporate dominance of the Democratic Party. I think that comes down at the root of so much of why it's so impossible to get a shift on any issue, including to getting better people in office. Because at the end of the day, and we were talking about this before you came on, the base of the Democratic Party supports really progressive policies, supports very left policies, but it's just not reflected at all in leadership. And I mean, what does that mean when you have this leadership of the party that is either silent when they come after people like Jamal Bowman or Cori Bush, or actively participates in trying to push them out? This does not seem to be a party that is at all supportive or conducive to having people like Cori Bush or Jamal Bowman inside of it.
Yeah, it's a real shame. And I've been saying over the course of this week, Democrats vote, but progressives organize. And I think that it's time for us to organize. We've tried to organize ourselves into the party unsuccessfully, and now it's time for us to begin organizing around the party and, taking our people. Third party, I think the Working Families Party is doing a great job of expanding. And as Maurice Mitchell says, we're building the party of our dreams. And I think that we have to lean more into that. We saw in Philadelphia, the minor party now is not the Republicans, but it's the WFP. So I think that, once we start at the local level and really put our investments on the ground, that we can begin to change the tide. And I'll just add that in New York State, Kathy Hochul's election, her margin of victory was progressives. It was the organizing of the Working Families Party to get people out to the polls and get her across the finish line. And we need for Democrats to acknowledge the power that progressives have within this party and not only acknowledge it, but if we don't have a pathway through, we're going to go around.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a point. And, sitting here in New York, it was amazing how, she wins and she's like, I'm everyone's unity candidate. We're coming together. Then the second, the midterms come around, she's dealing with all these absurd people with these racist politics. But, one thing I want to ask you, I mean, you're in Buffalo. This is like the quintessential working class America, you know what I mean? It's I think that's everyone's view. Hardworking town. Also, of course, one of the places victimized by deindustrialization in such a way. I mean, what are people on the ground in Buffalo? Like, what are they talking about in the store, at the barbershop? Like, what are the issues that are really like that are going to make and break the election, whether they vote, whether they don't vote, who they vote for? What are you hearing?
I think that for blue collar Rust Belt cities, Buffalo is no different from anywhere else. Folks are concerned about affordable housing. People are concerned about a livable wage. We have this effort, the Starbucks unionizing movement began in Buffalo, and there's not broad support for labor that the kind that is going to make transformative change in the city of Buffalo. So people want their basic needs met. They want a good job. They want a quality education. They want to feel safe. And, we're not seeing those things be delivered. And I think that in a city with a Black mayor who's been in office for 20 years, right? For me, the time has passed to make this focused on race, and we have to make it focused on class, because poor white people are suffering just as bad as poor Black people are in the city of Buffalo. And I'll also add that we had a horrible, horrible tragedy, a racist massacre in our grocery store in 2022, and it's been 2 years now, and there's still not expanded access to healthy fresh food on the east side of Buffalo. We have a power structure that locks people like me out who are doing the work. I'm watching my delegation. They're all talking to each other while I'm out here at Progressive Central and meeting people and networking and trying to bring back resources and different schools of thought to my city. And the folks who run the show are talking to each other in this echo chamber. And that's not how progress is made. That is not how change is brought forth. And I think that a lot of people are frustrated. And when I'm in the streets or the coffee shop or the barber shop, people are saying, we wonder how it will be different if you were our mayor. And at this point, I don't have an answer for them. But what I do know is that I'm not letting up. I will continue to speak truth to power, and I will continue to make connections in places like I'm at the DNC right now, but I'm talking to people like Nina Turner and and folks in the uncommitted movement, because that is important, and that is what changes communities like Buffalo, like Detroit, like Cleveland, like Chicago.
Well, since you are at the DNC, I have to ask you, what's your take so far on what you've seen? I know it's a really broad question, but, obviously for those of us who aren't there, a lot of the attention in the mainstream has been very much on, the sort of celebrity aspect of it. Lots of musicians playing. Oprah spoke. It's really exciting. Kamala Harris, a really united party, anti-Trump, and all these Republican speakers. People who've endorsed Kamala. And then online, it's been very much a focus on the uncommitted movement, not letting a Palestinian speak, the sit-in outside, some of the protests taking place outside, the heavy police presence. So I guess it depends where you're getting your news from. But as somebody on the inside, what's kind of been front and center for you at this Democratic convention?
The exclusivity, the opulence, and the waste has been front and center for me on the inside of the convention. There's not a lot of talk about substantive policy. There's not a lot of talk about a plan to move our communities forward, to provide healthcare, childcare, affordable housing, you name it. There's not much talk about that. Someone said that it was all about vibes. And at this point, when people are dying, when there is a genocide happening in Gaza, when folks are barely able to keep food on the table, we need more than just vibes. I can't feed my family with vibes. I want to hear policy. I want to hear an economic plan. And like I said, I spent the first 2 days that I was here with Progressive Democrats of America at the Chicago Teachers Union. And that was all the talk. All the talk was about policy. All the talk was about how we get things done for poor and working class people. I think that Governor Walz is a great choice. I like the way he's speaking. And, I would like to see not only the top of the ticket begin to adopt this kind of language, but also moving down at our state and municipal level offices doing the same speak. I mean, Minnesota has free breakfast and lunch for every child. They've cut taxes and all of these wonderful things that are very popular policies. This is not a progressive radical thing. This is popular among both Democrats and Republicans. And it's time for us to get this stuff done and stop our people from suffering. If we can spend $20 billion sending weapons to Israel to murder innocent women, men, and children, then surely we can find the money to get a Medicare for all and to get affordable housing and to improve the nutrition and the educational attainment of our children.
You would think it would be easy when you put it like that. I think, those are some hard questions we're going to have to ask. India, I know you have a lot going on. You're there in Chicago. I appreciate you being willing to jump on with us. We've been following your story. We'll keep following your work. Thanks so much for being with us here.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Mm-hmm. And this is Democratic National Convention special coverage, Free Speech TV and Breakthrough News. We've got Lawrence Grandpre with us. We've got Katie Halper with us, myself and Rania Khalek here for the next 12 minutes before we get you to prime time, big night. Katie, there's a lot of rumors about who might speak tonight. And, look, we don't know who it's going to be. Some people are saying it's Beyonce, but some people are even, and by some people I mean Don Lemon, reporting that he heard that it could be George W. Bush. Now, I highly doubt that it's going to be George W. Bush, but I wanted to say that because it does speak to something that I think Rania just said in the interview with India, that they've had a huge number of Republicans speaking at the convention this week. I mean, I think it's obvious to all of us why that is the case, but it just seems so amazing. Let me just not editorialize. I'm just going to leave you with that, Katie, please.
Maybe Dick Cheney. He'd be even better choice than Bush. More exciting.
You know what? Donald Trump at this point. Just like special
Mike
guest.
Pence. Mike Pence.
Zombie Reagan.
Yeah. I mean, they did have Melania's aide.
John Bolton.
Yeah. Well,
Juan Guaido.
Oh, wow.
That's a good one.
Why not?
Juan
You
Guaido.
know what? Why not? He would fit in better than any of us would. That's for sure.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me ask you both this. We're here in the last 10 minutes before Kamala Harris will speak. I mean, she'll obviously speak in like 2 hours, but nonetheless, she's here. I mean, I don't know if I want to ask you what you're expecting to hear, Lawrence, because who knows? And I think a lot of it will be sort of vacuous as a lot of these things always are in these speeches. But I mean, is there anything in particular you're like looking for? Like, does she mention this? Does she talk about that? I mean, whatever it signals, good, bad, or indifferent.
I mean, drug policy is something I've been focusing on. So I'm looking at the cannabis stuff, seeing if she's willing to pivot there. And yeah, like this cartel rhetoric, I'm looking to see how hard she goes in terms of how she talks about prosecuting cartels and just how, again, I feel like regressive. I mean, even from a basic stance, this convention has been on thinking about like the reality of people doing survival economics and the violence that comes within that is part of a larger progressive agenda. Like, people that sell drugs are becoming millionaires in the legal cannabis industry. And to pathologize them in this really, it's like Latin American Orientalism, where it's like everyone who sells drugs is part of a cartel. It's like, this is not the 80s in Colombia anymore. Like, these are crews of kids trying to survive. Like, how they have gang databases here in Baltimore is kind of how it is sometimes in Mexico, where it's just crews of kids trying to survive. And to think of this all as cartels in this very hierarchized way, I think that they really are selling this, like, we're going to pivot on immigration towards the center, and this cartel stuff is a big part of that. So I'm reading the cartel stuff not just in drug policy terms, but in immigration policy terms.
I mean, I think that's something that India said that was really important. And she said that the DNC was all about vibes and not any policy. And I actually saw people posting from like some brat party. They had like a brat party, literally, because like, brat. It was like some feminist, we're going to bring back the right to abortion sort of party. And I'm just like watching these images and I'm like, yeah, like I think one thing the Democrats are really, really good at is they're really good at taking these sort of popular culture references, like especially when Eugene's like, yeah, it's rumored Beyonce is going to come like speak as the special, whatever guest or speaker tonight. They're really good at latching onto popular culture in also the cringiest ways. But somehow it ends up sort of working for people who are really comfortable in life. That sort of like that kind of person who's comfortable doesn't really need free healthcare because they're like a Deloitte or McKinsey consultant. But they want access to like, reproductive rights, which is fair. And they don't really care about the rest of the world. And it seems to me that is something that I always assume, and I think I'm wrong to assume this. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. But then you look at it and it kind of seems to be working to some degree among a certain segment of people. And it's against Donald Trump. So I don't know. I start to feel a little bit disillusioned. So who wants to give a pep talk? That's where I'm going with this. We need a pep talk. I guess it's the middle of the night for me, so I'm in no condition. Katie, Eugene, Lawrence, somebody.
Well, this isn't a pep talk, but I forgot to mention this earlier, which people were talking about co-opting, had the Democrats try to co-opt. And something I saw that on Status Coup, Cornel West said that the Dems had made him an offer at the DNC to drop out of the race. And he said they had, quote, serious substantive conversations, end quote, about a cabinet position.
Well,
and paying off his campaign debt.
Well, yeah. Well, look, apparently he's
Oh,
in $17,000 of campaign debt. I assume he mentioned that because he wasn't taking it. But I
Yeah.
guess we shall see. I mean, RFK, not that I'm, anyway, I'll just say the reports are he's going to drop out tomorrow, is what a lot of people are predicting. Some people saying he's going to endorse Trump and that he's been offered something. So interesting to see how that sort of consolidates, in that regard, which I think will be very notable. I mean, I think it's going to be a close race either way. I mean, I think a lot of what we've been talking about here tonight speaks to it. I mean, I just don't think that the Democrats are making solutions that meet the scale of the problem. And I think a lot of people would say momentum is the easiest thing to lose in a political campaign. And right now they've got a lot of momentum, but as soon as the convention is over, it'll go back to sort of different pieces. How deeply people will look into that, we'll just have to see. How big the third party vote will be, we'll just have to see. But when you're looking at you take climate change, an existential issue, and where the U.S. is at right now under Biden, which Harris said she's basically going to continue his agenda, is 23 to 37% below where we need to be to meet the actual goal, to meet the 1.5% target. Basically it sort of means whoever wins, the planet is cooking, and that is a big challenge. And maybe Lawrence, I'll turn that to you because I think that's an important question here. Maybe as we come to a close, that the Democratic Party policies in a way are not necessarily benign, but many of them actually open up contradictions that seem to be helping the far right grow in some ways.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where the Inflation Reduction Act, to hit on climate, that's just so market-based that even some of the ways that we talk about green transitions, like from a justice perspective, like the mass manufacturing of batteries requires the exploitation of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in some really intense ways, right? So it's one of those things where I think that people feel, if they don't know the details like with you, but they feel the gap and they say, well, I know I'm being lied to by the left. The only people that seem to be challenging authority, challenging expertise, challenging the scientific establishment is the conservatives. So I think investing in a legitimate progressive conversation that validates people's legitimate concerns about elite control, that validates people's legitimate concerns about technocracy. To your point, I do feel some hope for my family. Remember the numbers of people that are on social media, even TikTok, it's a small percentage. Most of my family's just on Facebook, and they share memes that are all over the place, from right-wing conspiracies to left-wing conspiracies. And I weirdly feel hopeful about that because they're not propagandized. They may be chaotic, but they're not propagandized into the girl boss Kamala stuff. And I think sometimes the left sees that chaos and gets discouraged. I look at the chaos of my people and think they're able to hear a message. They know they're being lied to, and that's a start. And if we can not judge them for their limitations, but affirm that they basically feel the correct political gravity, then we can start organizing them.
No, very good point. I think it was Chairman Mao who said, everything under heaven in utter chaos, the situation is excellent. Katie, give me your 1 minute thing. You're the co-host of Useful Idiots. I know you talk to a bipartisan audience. What are you expecting here from this election? Big vote for third party, consolidation for Democrats or Republicans? Give me your final thought.
I think we're going to see a big, is it possible to have a simultaneous thing where
Yes.
big third party and also consolidation for Democrats? That's kind of what I'm expecting. Yeah.
Okay.
The sad thing though, is that I don't think it'll teach Democrats a lesson, even if they are hurt by the third party. And this is what's so scary and frustrating, is that even if they're hurt by the third party, then their solution to that will be, okay, we'll shift that much more to the right. We'll get the suburban Republican moderates.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know you asked for a pep talk, Rania. I don't know what to.
Well, look.
Wow, guys. Wow.
This
really
will be
big fail on the panel fail.
This will be a continuing, ongoing conversation across many different shows, including undoubtedly the Katie Halper Show. We're on Real TV now, by the way, guys. This is Breakthrough News and Free Speech TV, so we got to be tight on time. But I really, really, really want to thank both of you for joining us. Katie Halper, host of the Katie Halper Show and co-host of Useful Idiots. Lawrence Grandpre, Director of Research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, a grassroots think tank in Baltimore. Also want to thank Amanda Yee and Davon Love, who joined us yesterday. Thanks to everyone who watched, everyone who viewed. Huge shout out to Free Speech TV, whose idea this was for us to come together here for the DNC on 2 days. And I really couldn't have been more thrilled and super excited for us to be able to appear on that platform with our show, The Freedom Side, every single week. So shout out to the whole team there. Y'all know who you are. Been a great opportunity. Thanks to everyone from the Breakthrough News team who worked on this on the back end to make this possible, and all the other networks and all the other people. We are going to see what happens tonight. Kamala Harris will be speaking in primetime. There will be a surprise guest, maybe Beyonce, maybe George W. Bush, maybe someone totally different, kind of like a professional wrestling sort of lead out that they have there. Yeah, Taylor Swift, perhaps, Juan Guaido. Maybe all of them will come out in a USO-style chorus line. But thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it from myself and our whole Breakthrough News team. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you again very soon.